Sara. How's it going?
Hi, it's going great, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, and I'm so excited about this conversation. I have been thinking so much about the impact of technology on our mental health, on our emotional health, because as a startup entrepreneur and technologist, I've seen all of the amazing things that it has done for myself and for the world. At the same time, I look at a lot of the behaviors and habits that we deal with in modern society that humans have not really dealt with for most of their existence, and the challenges and trouble that they can cause. And so what I learned about your work and background and company, I could not resist having you on the show. And so maybe to frame things up, what is your background and how did you get interested in this topic of humans and technology?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. And of course, thanks for having me here. Well, my background is in social work, and basically somewhere on my second year of college, I started to notice the impact that the lack of understanding of your emotions and emotional regulation has on the relationships that our clients had, and that most of the problems that they were experiencing in their day-to-day life was related to the lack of their emotional understanding, intelligence, and general that skill set. So I started to be very interested in that topic first, and I was looking into social and emotional intelligence learning programs in the States and how the entire impact it has on the education system, on the children, and of course on the parents and the educators. And somewhere around that time, I started to work for a tech startup, and we've been building a social gamification platform. And one of the things that I started to notice is, because I was doing a lot of market research, was there was this trend, and it was like negative impact of technology on the youth's social and emotional development. So I decided, I was really, really interested in that topic, and I decided to do my master's research to actually explore what is the impact on the research side when we are looking at the science-based evidence and when we actually interview the students and the educators and the researchers, and to discover what is actually going on in that relationships in between humans and technology. So that was basically how it all started with my master's degree. And the findings were really, really interesting because we found that at the same time, there was some negative impact on their real life social skills. There was a lot of escapism from emotional situations, and students are just lacking that experience of actually confronting the emotions and experiencing them because they were able to go to TikToks and to Instagram and just kind of scroll and forget about it, right? But at the same time, there was a whole new set of skills that students are developing in the virtual realities. So we decided to kind of combine the two, and that brought us to Be Humane.
That's amazing. What would you say, the major takeaways for you on the downsides of technology? And, I just have some stats here that I thought were pretty interesting that you sent over prior to the show, and I'm happy to just read them. But adolescents using devices 5 or more hours a day were 66% more likely to have at least one suicide-related outcome. That's obviously terrible. Yeah. Results of a 2016 Common Sense Media report found that 50% of teens feel addicted to mobile devices, while 59% of parents believe their kids are addicted. 7 in 10 U.S. teens said anxiety and depression is a major problem among people at their age in the communities that they live in. And so, these are striking statistics. And yeah, I would just be curious, what are the cliff notes of all of that research and study?
Yeah, well, definitely we all see that there is a huge problem in our society, and where you look around, you see people behind their devices, and you go to a restaurant and you see a family and they don't hang out anymore as much as they did before. They're all just behind their devices, interacting with whatever it is, the content they're consuming at a time. So it creates a lot of social isolation. We are calling this age of the connections and networks, and everything is so much more accessible. But at the same time, it's taking away that human to human in real life component that is so important for our overall well-being, including our mental health, emotional health, etc. So what we were finding that when we were talking about teenagers about these topics, they acknowledge themselves that they see that they lack some social skills, that they're unable to start a conversation as easy anymore, especially after the COVID, when they were they had to be isolated of their peers. And they said that transition to going back into the society was very challenging for them. And when we were talking about the teenage years, those are the years when it's the most important to be around your peers and actually communicate and have those social interactions happening in various degrees and levels on how they go about it. So the scary thing, that what we found is around the suicide-related outcomes, anxiety and depression. They can all be tied back to the problem that we are facing is that there's no education. There's no onboarding to technology. There's no guidelines as to how you should use it for your own benefit. We know, okay, you should be more focused, or you shouldn't be before you go to bed or first thing in the morning, but no one actually tells you why. So that is the thing that we are focused the most, is that I remember one quote from a research when a teenager said he compared the technology usage to learning how to drive a car. And he said, you go to our school to learn the theory, the adults are showing you how to use a car, but to technology, we are just released onto it. So there's no guidance, there's no education again. So I think that is something that is so important to address. And just basically create an overall awareness around it and help to minimize those side effects that I think that the roots are to the lack of that knowledge around how to use it for better.
Yeah, I really like that approach and insight, because it seems like one option is parents would just say, well, we're not going to give our kids phones, or we're not going to let them use the computer after a certain hour, or XYZ. I mean, I had this in my own life where lots of parents gave their kids phones and I didn't have a phone. And so there's this kind of like shielding protection of inevitability, which seems like that is not the long-term solution. What are the options that parents have, and why do you think this education component is the paradigm that is going to be most helpful to remedy this situation?
Yeah. Well, I think that the starting point for parents is to educate themselves about the developmental stages of their child. So we're speaking about psychological, sociological, emotional, and physical. So basically to really understand what is actually happening to your child at that point in time, so that you can create the educated decisions around every question, including around their technology usage. Because one thing that was I remember when I went through a course about giving technology to children in kindergarten level. And the thing that was really interesting to me was that, before age of 3, children are unable to actually differentiate their reality and fantasy. So if you give them something that they can interact with, it's very hard to say, okay, this is not a real life. And that includes filters. So I've seen one video on Instagram Reels where there was this dad who was recording a video with his kid in the car, but he had a filter over his face, and he was, instead of being a dad, he was a bear. And he was making this voice, oh, I'm gonna take you away. And, he was joking with him, but the kid started to cry, and it was obviously very upset. Because what he saw was the filter, not his dad. And for him, that was the reality. So that can have a very like long lasting damages. And if you don't have that awareness on how to actually talk to your child about it and, come to it like, okay, this is the technology, this is how we are using it. So what we're talking a lot about is that educated onboarding to technology. And one of the most important skills under our curriculum is the purposeful usage of technology. So it's basically having that intention setting before we use it or our children use it. So having those conversations about, okay, so what do you want to get out of this experience when you're using technology, and the offboarding when we are looking into how did you felt when you were using technology. So I think that conversation needs to be brought to the table with parents, is to really, instead of just giving your kid to use laptop while you're in a restaurant just so that you have some peace of mind, you should go and talk to him about the content that he's actually interacting with and foster the connection in that way as well. Because that's the important part. It's like the co-viewing is one of the healthier ways of using technology when you have both the parent and the kid using it, talking about it. So it kind of, it creates the connections in many different levels. And you would usually do that with different toys. So why not with tech as well?
Yeah, it's like you teach your kid how to swing a baseball bat or dribble a soccer ball, but you don't really teach them this panacea of apps and the internet and phone and all of that. And ironically, like, that's something that's way more pervasive in their actual experience of life. And so it makes total sense. Switching gears a little bit. So we're starting to talk a little bit about your company, Be Humane. How would you describe Be Humane to someone at a cocktail party?
Well, Be Humane has several components to it, but the main thing is that we want to empower youth and advance humanity. So what do we mean by that? Is that obviously the world is changing and there are new set of skills that are needed in this role. So we call them the soft skills of the future, right? The social and emotional intelligence, like level 2, what goes into the how we interact with technology in such a way. So one of the things that we are doing is we're building a platform. It's called Live Atlas, and it's there to help youth to navigate these increasingly technology dependent lives and to foster their emotional, digital, and mental health.
That's awesome. So walk me through what an experience is. So how old would you say a typical, kid user would be that is using Be Humane?
Mm-hmm. So we are focusing on teenage age. We already have done some testing in terms of our curriculum and the version 1 of our prototype, which we built a metaverse game experience. And the idea behind it is for them to have a safe environment in which they can explore and learn from cause and effect relationships of their choices. So everything is around the game-based learning and the gamification, so that it kind of guides them in this more playful manner, especially with teenagers. You can't tell them what they need to do or don't do. There's no
Especially if you're a parent.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it.
Yeah, they don't want to hear it. They want to experience it. They want to have their own aha moments. They want to be like, oh, okay, so if I do that in real life, seeing what happened to my avatar in this game, I know what could happen. So it's much easier for me to go and do it or don't do it. So we are kind of educating them in that safe environment. But at the same time, one of the other components is, because we want to cover both the virtual realities and the real life, we also have built the app that takes them back into the real life, where they're able to practice those skills in the peer-to-peer content. So it's like the leveling up, and it's their tasks and their rewards. So basically they have that guidance into their skills development that is, more fun than just reading in textbook or having that interaction with their teachers. We think that, we should use technology for the good, and we are here to show it how to do it.
That's awesome. So I think I saw an example just to kind of paint a clear picture on your website where, you're in the metaverse, you're as an avatar, and someone sends you a hurtful text message in that experience. And it's like, okay, what do you do? Is that kind of like an idea of what a situation might look like that someone might encounter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are going to be many scenarios, that one including. So it's more also about the social skills. So for example, you have a scenario in which students are hanging out after school, and one of the friends is very upset about something that's happening in their life, and they want to share about it, but your phone keeps ringing, you get the notifications, and it's like, are you going to be present, and are you going to be fostering the active listening skills, or are you going to focus on your phone and be distracted from that? So it's kind of that awareness, what happens and what can hurt your friend's feelings, and what is considered a norm, and how can we change that?
I think we might need to have some adults on board to this too, because I got a lot of friends who aren't the best active listeners when I want to share my problems.
Yeah.
But seriously, that sounds awesome and exciting. And I guess, obviously in a perfect world, every child has access to this type of software, in school or on their iPad or wherever. But maybe more practically today, what are a few tips that you would give parents or soon to be parents like myself on best practices for using technology with their children?
Yeah. Well, like I said, one of the first things that I would advise is to educate yourself about your child's development, and then the co-viewing. So the co-viewing is really, I can give you an example from my personal life. I have a 4-year-old nephew, and he spends a lot of time on tablet, and he has like hundreds of games, and he likes to interact with them. But every time he plays them, it's just him sitting on the table doing it by himself. So after I got educated about, best practices around that, I started to sit next to him and asking questions about the game. What does he enjoy, likes the most? And now every time I'm there and he plays tablet, I'm the person he calls to be next to him. So he remembers that connection that we create, because, we are in an increasingly technology dependent era. And it's just going to continue to grow as to what technologies are we going to interact with. So we need to accept the fact that our kids are going to interact with technologies that we might not even understand. So how are we still going to be connected with them, because so much of their lives is in those virtual realities? Well, it goes back into just asking simple questions and, why are you there? What's important to you? What goes on in that world for you? Show that interest for them. And then again, simple strategies as, how far away you need to be from the computer, taking breaks, the importance of the balance in between the real life and the virtual life, and the purposeful usage, which is, using technology instead of technology using you. And that is just bringing in the awareness component into that interaction. So it goes both for the kids and the parents. And I think all of us have been guilty of spending some time in tech and then being, I actually don't feel good about myself, and not asking ourselves the questions about why. So I think this is another tool that can help us to deepen the relationship with ourselves as well as with our kids.
I love that answer. And yeah, I think it's quite simply be engaged.
Yeah.
Be engaged and embrace the reality that we live in, because if you're not going to, your kids are going to go to their friend's house and they're going to use technology there, or they're going to be in school. Fortunately, we can't control everything in terms of the experience of your kids. And so I think arming them to be successful makes a lot of sense to me. One question that I have for you is, as we move into this world of, more metaverse, more digital interactions, it does seem like it is easier for people to opt out of real life interactions. I mean, I've seen this in my own experience in the past decade, where early on in my dating life, I actually had to go up and talk to people in real life, in public places. And now, I had to call my girlfriend's house phone and talk to the parents and like all of this stuff. And now, as a youth or as a person in their 20s, you just don't have to do any of this anymore. And in many ways, it seems like people have been blunted in their ability to confidently interact in the world. And so I can see where the digital metaverse example that you talked about encourages regulation of these technologies and best practices and how to use them effectively. But what I'm still trying to understand is in a metaverse where you can really kind of fabricate who you want to be, how people think of you, this whole kind of digital self, it just seems like it's going to be really, really hard to incentivize people to sow into the real world. And I'm sure there's people out there that says, well, the digital world is the real world. It's all the real world. And I get that. But how do you think about us encouraging people to move as a society to continue to integrate and build social skills in person that is offline?
Yeah, I think that the good start would be to have those conversations about how they feel when they interact in those virtual realities and what for them that they're missing or getting out of it. Because again, it's very hard to say, oh, you need to spend, if you have spent 5 hours in the metaverse, therefore you need to now spend 5 hours walking around the street trying to talk to random people. It's not the same, but it's like, okay, so what are you getting out of this and how can you take that into the real world? Because if we talk about the overall health, I think that that's where that question has, starts to have answers for people, because everyone kind of knows, oh, that's actually not the healthiest life. If I'm just standing or sitting behind the computer, spending my day just fabricating this version of myself. It's great for the exploration of the identity. And one thing that people love about the metaverse experiences is that they are able to find their belongingness much sooner than perhaps they would in the real world, because it takes time for them to go and find those communities. But again, it's like, how can we leverage one of the other and bring the benefits from the virtual world to the real world and the vice versa? And I can say that, just by having those conversations, people do have their own aha moments by, hey, so what it is there for you and how can you make that better for yourself in the real world?
I like that. Yeah, it's like understanding what is the payoff that someone's getting. And then as a parent, taking responsibility for figuring out how you can help your child achieve similar benefits. That makes a lot of sense to me. One thing that I think is very interesting about all of this is what I've come to know in my own kind of evolution of consciousness and spirituality is that emotional bypass is one of the biggest impediments to overall our evolution of our consciousness, right? Not actually sitting and feeling emotions, not being in touch with those things. Eventually that kind of all builds up and obfuscates our perception of who we are, what we're capable of, reality, and we just end up carrying it around a lot with us. And so I never really thought about the fact that with all of these apps and stuff, it really is just providing escapism to feeling all of that. And in many ways, kind of making the spiritual path of awareness of the good and the bad actually more difficult. And so don't know that I have a question for you on that there, but I think it's more of a call out that's really interesting and something I'm mindful of in my own experience.
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it with that comment, because I think that when I would talk with people about the escapism with technology, some would say, well, escapism has been there as a defense mechanism for ages. Before it was, drinking or smoking or, going somewhere just to get away from people and not to have to deal with it. But today it's so much more easier. It's just to grab this thing that is sitting next to you and is in your pocket anywhere you go. And and immediately when you feel uncomfortable about something, you can just go and like get this dopamine hit and be like, oh, I feel good now. But it's as we know, it gets stored in your body. And now imagine having generations of kids living lives like that, where they're no longer, because now everyone is so used to having this, calm kids behind tablets that don't get upset, that they're just like, every time they are sad or upset, you just give them the games, just give them this, distraction. And they just have this energy sitting in them, not being expressed. So I think that is the danger of it. It's like, how do we coexist with technology for the benefit of us all is what we really need to be mindful of. And sometimes just bringing in the awareness component brings a whole new set of possibilities for people, even though you are not perhaps educated about the techniques, but you can come up with the ideas by yourself because now you know.
Yeah. Well, I don't think, talk about like on-ramping to emotional development. No one told me as a kid that, hey, it's really, really important to actually feel your emotions because there's actually a whole byproduct that can occur that can negatively impact everything if you don't do that. Like no one told me that. In fact, I think there was a lot of cultural dogma and rhetoric around pushing through and, gritting it out and all that type of stuff. And emotions are for the weak, especially in male culture. And so, I think we just need to change that narrative and attach some type of notion of progress or like levels or evolution to feeling things, because it very much, in my experience, has been the opposite of feeling things, the opposite of taking a minute and recognizing that you're upset and sitting with it at the expense of productivity, which is something that so many founders and entrepreneurs and business people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. We need to bring this conversation in many different rooms, especially in entrepreneurship and with founders, because I know from my experience in the United States, when I was in a incubation program, there was just so much emphasis on, getting more things done, doing more things. And unfortunately, I had to witness in some of my close circles of someone, ultimately getting a cancer because there was so much things in that whole entrepreneurship route that it wasn't fully experienced and that just festered within. And that really made me think of how can I get to the goal and the impacts I want to make as a founder and staying healthy on the way. So the emotional intelligence is just one aspect of it, because ultimately so much of it is related to experiencing and feeling those emotions and not, sharing them in a negative, in like unaware way with others, in terms of like just having those emotional outbursts that people have because they were not dealing with the things for a longer period of time. So I think it's so important for us to make this more of a mainstream knowledge and understanding.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation. That's
Yeah.
that's what this show is all about. How do we bridge the gap between the leaders in the world and, the magical experience of the evolution of consciousness and the accordant levels of peace, happiness, and joy, and creativity, and power, and loving power, and all the things that come with that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you are an entrepreneur, you went through a startup incubator, you're running a venture-backed company, and you're also a spiritual person. Based on the little that I know about you in our previous conversation, how do you think about striking that balance in your experience?
Well, I look at the spirituality as a base. So that's like the non-negotiable aspect of me and my daily life. So every day, I know this sounds like everyone does it, but honestly, every day, starting with meditation, starting with yoga, with some journaling has been the most life-changing habits that I've created. And I can definitely identify the differences when I am not as regular with it. I can see how it's affecting my productivity, my thoughts, my approach to things. I'm more on the edge. So I would say that this is something that has been there even before my entrepreneurship side started to develop. And it kind of was I felt like that the experiences and the wisdom that I've gained through spiritual practices and plant medicine is something that allowed me to really see on some much deeper level to why what we are doing is so important, and going back to, processing your emotions, having that awareness, giving meaning to your trauma and different experiences, especially during the teenage age. There's so much confusion around what's going on. So I feel like that, the combination of the two really brings about a much healthier life.
I'm with you. Yeah. And I think this is the conversation that needs to occur, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs think about this as an either or. It's like either I pursue my spirituality with lots of earnestly, and or I really try hard in business. And my experience has been it's actually a both and is possible. And what it really comes down to is, where is your allegiance? Is your allegiance to your spiritual evolution, or is it to whatever your startup success or whatever it is? Because you're faced with these trade-offs all day long where it's like, okay, this thing just happened and I'm all angry and I can use this as an experience for my growth, or I can just continue to press on and be productive because I need to get this thing done. And this just happens over and over and over and over again. And so if you are able to define where your allegiance is, and realize it's both, that to me was a big turning point and a very, very helpful thing, where I actually began to use the experiences of everyday life running a company as basically my teacher for spiritual growth. What am I reacting to? What's causing me to get triggered? Sitting with that, understanding it, resolving the energy behind it, transmuting it into higher expressions. And so, I think there's just a lot of education and confusion about that balancing act. And, I loved how you put it in terms of like having a foundation. And I think it's just something that you can kind of put it off or go through the experience. And for me, with just my own meditation practice, like it just reached a point where it was a non-negotiable anymore. I couldn't just meditate to be not stressed out. And then, okay, I'm good for a few months and then I get stressed out again. And then it's like, no, this is the most important thing. And what I also think a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand is that when you tap into that deeper level of awareness, it's been my experience that there's actually much more creativity. There's room for spontaneous genius to emerge, much so than before. And there's room for intuition and all of these magical things. Like, it's funny, and I'd love your perspective on this because I feel like I'm rambling. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs talk about, the best decisions I always made were from my gut, right? You probably heard that before.
Yeah.
And the irony is that very few people intentionally practice developing a way to get in touch with that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Absolutely.
we cite it as a source of premier information, yet we don't actually invest in getting in touch with our intuition, higher consciousness, higher intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And so I just think it's very fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that one thing that it's in relation to being connected to your gut and that higher source of information is, the connection that you have with yourself and with your body. Because so much of that wisdom comes from that aspect, and people just tend to be so much in their mind, especially in the entrepreneurship. It's always about like doing more, getting more done. How can we, optimize this? How can we get these results faster? And all of that sometimes comes at the expense of the creativity, because for the creativity, you need to create the space. There needs to be an intentionality around, okay, now I'm leaving space for the magic to happen, for the flow, for new ideas, for, not just doing something that you read that some other founder did because, he succeeded at it, therefore you need to do the same. So it's like, there's just so much programming. And, I have recently, when I came back from the States, and I had my co-founder is from Australia. So I went to visit him in Australia, and I took a step back from everything. And I was like, okay, so how I approach this spiritual / entrepreneurial self? And the answer that I got was around creating phases in your life. Yes, sometimes it's important to be in the doing, in the getting things done, in making that progress. But being intentional around it is so much more, I think, healthier way to go about it, because then you know that you created a container, you created a space in which that is about to happen. But that phase needs to be followed by receiving phase, by resting phase, by recharging phase. Because, we are not made to be just doing. We need to have that moment of rest, and our health needs that. Maybe we think we don't because we are 20, 30, whatever, 40-year-olds, and we are trained to just think that we can just go straight the line and not stop ever. But that's not how our bodies work, and that ultimately has a price somewhere, being that your mental health, physical health, or in your family and friends. So I think it's just, again, I think that the whole point is the intentionality. It's kind of like the underlying theme.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's funny. If you ask any entrepreneur, what would you rather have? A stroke of creative genius or brilliance, or getting through your email? Which one is going to have a bigger impact on your life and business? I think everyone would tell you that the stroke of genius would. Yet, when you look at the behaviors, it's not congruent with that at all. And I think, to me, this is an education thing where there's a lack of acknowledgement and recognition that in that space, whether it's walking around outside in nature or meditating or unplugging, in the stillness, that is where brilliant ideas come from. And there's this just complete dismissal of that or lack of understanding of that. And so one of the things that I've been doing in my own life, like you, I have a meditation practice and I have a inquiry practice where I ask for a lot of information. But one of the things I've been doing as well, which has been really cool, is a couple times a day, I will just go outside, I'll take my shirt off, get that vitamin D, I'll take my shoes off, and I'll have my phone on airplane mode, and I will just walk around for 10, 15 minutes and see what comes up. And it's freaking awesome. And I actually ran a little experiment where I have this notes app on my phone, and when great ideas would come up in those periods, I would write down walk dash and the idea so that I more or less had attribution to that activity. And after doing this for a week, guess what? I had a whole list of great ideas that I probably wouldn't have experienced otherwise. And that kind of gave me the confidence needed to continue to do the practice relative to the perceived trade-offs, like doing more work in front of the computer. And so, you know, there's all types of ways to do this, but you're right. It all comes back to intentionality and education and awareness of where creativity comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sara, this has been an amazing conversation. I am jacked up. For people that want to know more about Be Humane and you, where is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, of course. Well, we have a website where you can find all the information about the project. BeHumane.co is our main project website. And we also have a product website, which is liveatlas.io, where you can learn more about our mixed reality learning platform. And you can always contact me on Twitter, Filipc-Sara. That is without the H.
Nice. And so, just so people understand, I mean, is the technology today, is that something any consumer can sign up for? Is it more being distributed throughout schools? How can one interact with this if they have children and are considering something like this to be helpful?
Yeah, of course. So we are actually launching our closed beta of our app in March. So we are creating the waitlist for that, and that is to interact for any youth or teenager. Basically, it's just more general purpose. But at the same time, we are gearing up for a fundraise to continue with development of our metaverse part of the platform, which is going to be more so for the schools and the universities. But there will be a little bit for everyone. We want to make the impact anywhere we go. We're also looking into building stuff for parents and educators, but our main focus right now is the youth.
Amazing. Well, the youth is the future. So yes. I love that.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Sara. You are an amazing human and what you're doing is awesome. Thanks everybody for listening. This was really fun. We got lots of love for you guys. And if you like this show, give it a review, share it with a friend, do whatever you want. We're just grateful. And we'll see everybody on the next episode.